I'm TJ from New Zealand Mysteries. Thanks for being here, guys. Today we're going to look into the case of murdered 6-year-old Alicia O'Reilly. This happened in 1980. We're going to start first with this in-depth feature article from nzherald.co.nz. It's written by Jared Savage. Nancy O'Reilly was bracing herself for a grim winter's night. Dark clouds were rolling in, and although it wasn't raining just yet, the council-owned house in Avondale, Auckland, where the 27-year-old single mum was living, wasn't built for stormy weather. It was a turn-of-the-century villa with a single hallway running through the middle, connecting the front and back doors. Drafts of wind would come up straight through the cracks in the floorboards, which Nancy tried to cover with mismatched squares of carpet to keep the heat in. Several layers of wallpaper were glued to the scrim lining, sagging away from the 12-foot stud walls. The toilet was outside. The lawns were long. The place was in a dreadful state, but it was all Nancy could afford. She lived there with her daughters Juliet and Alicia, aged 8 and 6, and Isabel, an 18-year-old boarder who helped look after the girls. It was August 15th, 1980, a Friday night, and Nancy and Isabel had cooked dinner for their boyfriends, Nigel and Jimmy. Nigel and Jimmy were staying the night, and both couples planned to visit the Victoria Park markets in the morning. When no one was looking, Alicia tipped her meal out of the window of her bedroom. She didn't like chow mein. As the two girls were getting ready for bed after watching the Dukes of Hazzard in front of the fire, Nancy spotted Alicia walking down the hallway with her dressing gown wrapped suspiciously around her body. "Alicia, you're not taking that cat to bed," called out Nancy, and there followed a thud as the 6-year-old dropped the cat on the floor. Alicia ran down the hallway, asking her mum to tuck her under her ballerina quilt. Nancy got distracted by the movie on television, so both her girls had fallen asleep by the time she came into the bedroom to say goodnight. Nancy kissed Juliet and Alicia and went to bed. It was the last time she'd see Alicia alive. The rain bucketed down on the tin roof overnight, the soothing sound drowning out any other noise in the house. Nancy got up around 7:30 a.m. on Saturday to find Juliet playing with her dolls in front of the heater in the lounge. She thought that was odd. Alicia was always up first, and if she was awake, everyone would be awake. Nancy sighed with relief. She could go back to bed to have a cup of tea and read the newspaper. Her bedroom was across the hallway from the girls' room, so she could see the lump of Alicia's body under the blankets. She went back to reading the paper until another friend of the flat, Jim, came by to pick up some tobacco he'd left behind. As Jim went to leave, Nancy asked him to check on Alicia, so he walked into the girls' bedroom. I saw the look on his face. Then he yelled, "Nigel, can you come here?" I just jumped out of bed. I knew something wasn't right, Nancy says. Nigel's words were followed by a long silence. It says here, I went up to the bed and I grabbed her arm. Her arm was stiff and I just dropped it. I knew. Alicia had an obsession with pills and tablets. Nancy raced into the dining room to check a cupboard high out of the reach of the children, where all the medicines were kept. Nothing had been touched. Nancy went back to the bedroom and pulled back the covers. The Paddington Bear sheets were covered with blood, and she couldn't understand why. Alicia's face was purple and swollen. Nancy was repulsed by the ugliness of her beautiful little girl. She stumbled into the hallway and could hear a woman screaming hysterically. People walking past the Canal Road house to the nearby Avondale racecourse stared at her. Nancy realised she was the one crying in anguish. Ambulance staff and police officers appeared from nowhere to ask questions and take notes. Cameras flashed. Nancy was taken by police officers to the Auckland Central Station through a back door and into a lift. When the elevator opened, a sign on the door opposite read, "O'Reilly Homicide." She was taken into a neighbouring room and sat down at a table before a police officer sternly delivered a terrible truth. "Mrs. O'Reilly, we need to tell you your daughter has been brutally murdered and severely sexually assaulted." Nancy recalls word for word nearly 40 years later. She said it was a gut punch. I just put my arms around my stomach and I just kept rocking and making an awful, awful noise. And then the policeman said, "Keep your voice down, your other daughter is in the next room." And I shut up and shut down. That's the only way I can really describe it. It's taken me years to get where I am today. Tomorrow, Sunday, 16th of August 2020, marks the 40th anniversary of the day Alicia O'Reilly was found dead in her bed. Her killer was never found. It's difficult to imagine a more horrendous crime than the rape and murder of a 6-year-old girl with her sister sleeping just metres away. All little girls should be safe in their beds. Nancy O'Reilly was hopeful, of course, that whoever took the life of her daughter would be caught. Weeks went by without an arrest, then months slipped by, which turned into years. Tragedy would again strike for Nancy, who has experienced more grief and heartache in her lifetime than most people could endure. At the time of this article, she was 67 and battling cancer. Long ago, Nancy stopped hoping for justice for Alicia, and any thoughts of punitive vengeance gave way to wanting to ask the killer just one question: why did you choose my house? There may not be an answer, but a veteran detective on the case since day one of the investigation has never given up trying to find out. His efforts behind the scenes have led Auckland City Police to review the evidence on the original file with fresh eyes in 2020, with at least one new line of inquiry to explore. The policeman, Alsop Smith detective, was a young trainee detective in the Auckland CIB in 1980 August, and given the somewhat menial task of securing the crime scene at Canal Road, Avondale. He recalls scrambling or combing through the long, unkept grass on his hands and knees looking for clues. Looking back, he says he remembers it was difficult to comprehend the magnitude of what had happened. He had worked homicide investigations before, but this was a far cry from a drunken brawl on Queen Street, which had taken a fatal turn for the worst. He said, "You find a kid dead in her bed, you don't automatically think someone's broken in and killed her overnight. It's not a place you can get to without being forced by the evidence," he said. And the evidence does force us to. There's no wriggle room by which you can come to a different conclusion. The pathologist who wrote the post-mortem report concluded that Alicia was suffocated. He found semen in her body and determined her injuries were caused by a sexual assault. On hearing the disturbing sexual element, Nancy O'Reilly struggled to cope as it brought back memories of her own sexual abuse as a child and the feeling she had failed to protect Alicia from the same suffering. She also felt a strange sense of relief. The sexual assault was proof she hadn't killed her daughter. "I thought, thank God it wasn't me. I was so screwed up mentally at the time. I thought I might have gotten up in the middle of the night and heard her." Fingerprints and a partial palm print were found by police and cross-checked with 200,000 sets of prints. There were no matches. If Alicia had been killed today, the semen found would be considered almost ironclad evidence if the DNA from the sample matched a suspect's genetic profile. Back in 1980, even the idea of DNA was the stuff of science fiction. There was other forensic evidence, though. Pubic hairs. They were sent for testing in Australia, which identified the killer's blood type and as likely being of Pacific Island or Māori descent. The hair follicles revealed another circumstantial clue. The strands were contaminated with 5 elements of the periodic table: antimony, cobalt, chromium, barium, and iron. And I've probably said some of those wrong. This indicated the killer probably worked in a ceramic or paint industry. In the 1980s, Avondale was a working-class suburb where many residents worked at industrial factories along Rosebank Road in nearby New Lynn. More than 600 people were nominated by police or members of the public as Alicia's potential killer. Without DNA science, or even an eyewitness account for that matter, to point the finger at a specific individual, the murder investigation relied on old-fashioned detective work to whittle down the suspect list. Many were ruled out because their blood type was different to the suspect's hair sample. This narrowed the field a little, but the rest had to be interviewed and have their alibis checked out by detectives. Some of the suspects were child sex offenders and had rock-solid alibis. They were in prison in the time. Others were harder to corroborate. In those days, there was no digital footprints like cell phone, GPS, credit card or EFTPOS transactions, social media posts and security cameras to track someone's movements. Someone's alibi often relied solely on the word of a family member, friend or colleague. Allsop Smith says, from time to time we know that people's recollection can be mistaken. That's why it's so important to get these alibis checked out early rather than wait weeks or months. And I know myself, my short-term memory is crap. So I usually have to get things out pretty damn quickly or I know I'm going to forget them. Nigel and Jimmy, the two men who stayed the night with their girlfriends Nancy and Isabel, were also ruled out. This means the police were looking for a killer who broke into the house, suggesting they had some sort of geographical connection. Officers went door to door in the residential streets around Canal Road, as well as visiting the commercial businesses to gather up every detail, no matter how insignificant it might seem. In particular, the police wanted to speak with anyone working the night shift on the Friday evening, or before the sun came up on the Saturday morning Alicia's body was discovered. A strongly built Polynesian man about 1.8 metres tall had been seen outside the O'Reilly residence around 6:30 a.m. He was wearing an army-style jacket, dark trousers and boots. An identikit picture was released to the public, but nothing came of it. The police started to focus their attention on a 23-year-old man who lived nearby. He had suffered permanent brain damage in an accident and had the mental age of an 8-year-old boy. When questioned, the young man denied any involvement, but described a vivid dream in which he saw a small boy enter the O'Reilly home and kill Alicia, which is just strange as. He became the prime suspect, but willingly volunteered his fingerprints as well as hair, blood, nail and semen samples. His blood type was the same, but otherwise no match could be made. Nancy O'Reilly never really believed this young man was responsible for Alicia's death, although she can't put her finger on why. She had so many unanswered questions that gnawed at her. One thing that puzzled her was why Alicia was brutally killed, but Juliet, who was only metres away, was untouched. She said, "The only thing I can think of was Jules had short hair and was wearing hand-me-down boys' pyjamas," said Nancy, "and that may have saved her life." She's convinced, however, that the 8-year-old Juliet saw what happened to Alicia. Compared to Alicia, whom everyone regarded as the life of the party, Juliet had always been a very responsible and serious child. Following her sister's death, she became even more shy and withdrawn. Nancy said, "I think she saw something and I think she just shut down." The possibility that Juliet had vital information to solve the case was a genuine prospect for the police, who briefly considered hypnotherapy to draw out any repressed memories. The police poured a huge amount of resources into Operation Sturbridge, that's what they called it. Inevitably, as more time passed without progress, the number of staff working on the case dwindled. The trail ran cold, and with it Nancy's hopes faded as each year passed. Her anguish never waned. She just was numbed by pain. Then, in 1987 in November, she was plunged into a new tragedy. Nancy and Juliet were passengers in a car, travelling in Mount Wellington when another car ploughed into them. Juliet, aged 15 at the time, died at the scene of the accident. The driver of the other vehicle was drunk. Nancy was left reeling, plunged into a particular grief that few people could understand. Both her girls were gone in tragic circumstances that no one could predict. This was different, though, because of the healing power of forgiveness. Where Alicia's life had been taken in the middle of night by a stranger, a faceless monster, Juliet had been killed by someone who was little more than a boy himself. The 20-year-old pleaded guilty to drink driving causing death, and Nancy agreed to meet with him ahead of the sentencing hearing at the Auckland District Court. It was a wonderful meeting which ended with him in tears, apologising to me, and I gave him a hug. He didn't wake up that morning thinking, "I'm going to kill Juliet O'Reilly," she said. I copped a lot of flack for forgiving that boy, but forgiving him was one of the most wonderful experiences. A whole weight lifted off my shoulders. And good on her for being able to do it. I don't know if that's something I could do myself. Nancy learned to live with the pain and get on with her life. She had a job and a partner, and 2 years after Juliet's death, they fell pregnant. However, the joy of creating new life soon dissolved into numbness. Their little girl Kimberly died a few hours after being born. You know, this is why we do these, because we want to help these families, and I really want to help Nancy find out who done this to her daughter. We're going to talk about how you can help after as well. On top of her grief at having to bury a third child, Nancy felt guilt and shame that somehow she was to blame for their deaths. She said, by the time the third funeral had come around, I was apologising to everyone for having to come to yet another one of my daughter's funerals, said Nancy. They saw me as a jinx. They did. We might catch it off her. It's a very lonely experience. Asked how she coped with such recurring tragedy, Nancy says her tough childhood made her resilient. Her father was taken away to a mental institution, and her mother was left to run the farm. When her mother's anger and frustration boiled over, Nancy copped the brunt of it. She was also sexually abused as a teenager. She believes the stress and anxiety of her childhood prepared her to cope with Alicia's murder and the subsequent deaths of Juliet and Kimberly. She said, I had 3 choices. You could kill yourself, and I had a very religious upbringing, so I wasn't going to do that. You could live a half-life, and boy, I've lived a half-life for a long time. Or you can get on with it. I think that's it, really. As Nancy O'Reilly got on with her life, so did Detective Stu Alsop Smith. His police career progressed through working on countless murders and drug investigations, although the disturbing death of Alicia O'Reilly remained burned into his mind. I'm not going to read the rest of this one, but as always, the links and sources part in the description box below will have all of these articles so you can read them yourself. Now, let's move on to 2021.
The question that haunts parents the most when their children are killed is, did she know what was happening to her?
Alicia was at home that evening. She was asleep in her bed. Someone has entered that house and murdered and raped her, while there were other people asleep in other rooms, and while her sister Juliet was asleep in the bed next to her. It is a horrible, terrible event to happen to such a young person.
I want to know why he chose our house. Had he been watching Alicia? Had he been watching the girls? Why did he come into our house when there were 4 adults in the house?
So this is nzherald.co.nz. Again, if you want to watch the rest of that video, in the description box below. DNA breakthrough, new hope in 1980 murder of 6-year-old Alicia O'Reilly. This is written again by Jared Savage. Police and scientists reinvestigating the rape and murder of a young girl more than 40 years ago have made a dramatic DNA discovery, which they hope will finally crack the baffling cold case. Alicia O'Reilly, 6, was found dead in her home in the Auckland suburb of Avondale in August 1980, while her sister Juliet, 8, slept just metres away in the same room. The horrendous crime shocked New Zealand, it really did, and hundreds of suspects were questioned in the homicide investigation, with every home and business in the neighbouring suburbs visited by police officers. Alicia's killer was never found. The startling new DNA discovery has ruled out the original prime suspect, but reinvigorated the investigation 41 years later. Police are confident they'll now be able to solve the case and are now screening hundreds of other potential suspects in search of a DNA match. While forensic science was rudimentary in the 1980s and the idea of matching DNA samples was akin to science fiction, detectives working on the case decades later believed that important evidence, hair and semen left by the killer, had been inexplicably destroyed during the investigation, or the original one anyway. Yet, in a stunning twist last year, some of the crucial swabs were discovered in an unmarked envelope in the bottom of a cardboard box in police archives. More samples were unearthed in storage rooms of the Auckland DHB Pathology Department. There were glass slides preserving samples from the post-mortem examination of Alicia in 1980 August. The long-lost evidence was tested by scientists at ESR, which is the Crown Research Institute. I'm having a little bit of mouth mush today, guys. They were able to extract a full DNA profile for analysis. That was a high-five moment for us as a team, said Detective Senior Sergeant Naharaka Latimer, the officer in charge of the investigation. However, no DNA match has been found. This is despite the genetic code being compared to hundreds of thousands of profiles collected from criminals or crime scenes held in databanks in New Zealand and Australia. DNA has been routinely collected from serious criminals since the mid-1990s, so the lack of a hit suggests that either Alicia's killer did not commit another offence, which police consider to be unlikely given the sexual nature of the death, or he died before his DNA could be collected. Another possibility is he no longer lives in New Zealand or Australia. Despite not having immediate success with a DNA match, detectives working on the case believe they are closer than ever to identifying Alicia's killer. This is because prior to the discovery of the DNA profile, any person nominated as a suspect could only be eliminated from the inquiry by old-fashioned detective work to confirm their whereabouts on the night Alicia was killed. In the 1980s, there were no digital footprints. We know this, no smartphone, GPS, no social media, no FPOS. Someone's alibi often relied solely on the word of a family member, friend or colleague, and the memory of well-intentioned witnesses can be notoriously mistaken within a few days, let alone decades. Now armed with the killer's DNA profile, a suspect can be ruled out, or the culprit identified at last, with nothing more than swabbing the inside of someone's mouth. The police and ESR are currently working their way through a list of 800 suspects, with more than 140 persons of interest ruled out so far after giving voluntary DNA samples. One of those eliminated was the prime suspect favoured by the original inquiry team, a 23-year-old man who lived near Alicia's home on Canal Road. He had suffered permanent brain damage in an accident and as a result had the mental age of an 8-year-old boy. When questioned by police in the 1980s, the young man denied any involvement, but weirdly, again we hear this, he described a vivid dream, which is just odd. For more than 40 years, his family carried the weight that he might have been involved in her death. Detective Senior Sergeant Latimer says the DNA profile means the suspect has been conclusively ruled out, and the news police shared with the family in an emotional meeting. She appealed for anyone with any information to contact the police. People might have thought at the time that the police had the offender, so they didn't come forward, but we don't have any suspects in mind, said Latimer. We really need the public's help to share any information. However small it may be, it can still be relevant to us. The smallest piece of information can lead to the biggest breakthrough, and we really want to solve this for Alicia's parents, Nancy and Barry. Nancy O'Reilly, 68, told the Herald she was shocked when the police told her that the crime scene evidence believed to be destroyed was, in fact, discovered in storage. Shock turned to elation, said Nancy, before she tried to keep her expectations in check. That's what I've had to do over the years, not get too elated or too upset about things, said Nancy. But getting a full DNA profile is a major breakthrough. While she questioned how such samples could be listed as destroyed in police records, then found decades later, Nancy believed there was a silver lining in the evidence being lost for so long. If the samples had been tested for DNA back in the early 2000s, when the science was in its infancy, Nancy says a full profile may not have been possible for ESR to obtain, or the evidence destroyed in the process. She says, "My philosophy in life is what will be, and this wasn't meant to happen until now. You have to look at the positive side of it." While excited by the possibility of finally learning who killed her daughter, Nancy says the discovery of the DNA profile has also thrown her backwards. She says, "It's a very strange, surreal feeling of having 1 foot in 1980 and 1 foot in 2021. I'm waiting, says Nancy. Does it bring back the pain? Yes, it does. Does it bring back hope? Yes, it does. If the police do find Alicia's killer more than 40 years on, Nancy said her need for revenge is now gone. She's gone through the anger stage of the grieving process and has forgiven the man who killed her daughter for her own sake, not his. She doesn't want a criminal trial, just a name put to the faceless monster who has given her so many sleepless nights. She said, "When I was young, I was able to curb my emotions. Now I'm nearing 70, I find it very hard. You just think, how many years have I got left? Can we please have an answer before I pass?" A veteran detective on the case since the first day of the investigation has never given up. As a rookie, we know that Stu Alsop-Smith was on his hands and knees, scouring the long grass outside the O'Reilly home for evidence in Auckland 1980. His police career progressed through working on countless murders and drug investigations, although the disturbing death of Alicia O'Reilly remained burned in his mind. His persistence behind the scenes led to the discovery of the killer's hair samples in 2019, thought to have been consumed by the blood type testing process in Australia back in 1980. In fact, not all the hairs had been tested, and unbeknown to the police, the spare samples had been returned to the ESR. At his urging, staff at the ESR searched its archives and found the long-lost hairs. ESR scientists were unable to obtain a DNA profile from the hairs, but the discovery was enough to convince the police hierarchy to commit significant resources to solve the cold case. A new team of detectives, led by Latimer, was established to reinvestigate the murder with a fresh set of eyes. The first task was to rifle through the investigation file, which was 16 cardboard boxes, and manually scan thousands of pages of documents into a digital format which is easier to search. He grabbed the first box. At the bottom was an unmarked brown A5-sized envelope, which, when he opened, had 2 swabs inside plastic tubes marked Alicia O'Reilly. He said that was another high-five moment. The swabs were sent to the ESR laboratory in Mount Albert, where scientists were able to extract a partial DNA profile. The genetic code was put through New Zealand's DNA databanks, both for convicted offenders and DNA found at crime scenes, but without a match. The swabs had been recorded as destroyed in the police evidence logbook, a surprising decision which had been confirmed verbally by the officer in charge of the case in the 1980s. This prompted another question. What else still exists? So, Alsop-Smith had previously asked the pathology department at Auckland District Health Board to search their archives without success, but he repeated the request. This time, the pathologist found something. Extra swab samples had been taken during Alicia's post-mortem examination, which had been wiped onto a glass slide to transfer material which was preserved under a glass cover slip. ESR scientists soaked the slides, which had been fixed together in a corrosive solution, for 4 days to gently prise off the cover slip. This time, a full DNA profile was extracted, but again there was no hit on the DNA database. But ESR was able to perform another DNA test to analyse the Y chromosome, which is passed down through the male side of the family. If a nominated suspect is dead or perhaps refuses to give voluntary DNA sample, the police can approach male relatives for a reference sample to compare to the killer's profile. This could eliminate the suspect from the inquiry or confirm a match for the police to investigate further. Anna Lamalu is one of the forensic scientists at ESR who analysed the DNA profile of Alicia's killer. She then compared the results to more than 200,000 profiles held on the New Zealand databanks, as well in excess of 100 voluntary samples. Working on a cold case more than 40 years old was out of the ordinary, she said, especially when ESR did not know how the samples were stored over that time. However, she said DNA can last a very long time in the right environment, and in this case, ESR went beyond the standard tests in order to obtain the full profile. This was great lab work. I'm very confident in the quality of the results, she said, despite the age of the sample. If a suspect's DNA did match the profile of Alicia's murderer, Lamalu said that it's possible that the likelihood of finding the DNA left at the crime scene could be more than 100,000 million times greater if it had come from the suspect, rather than from another person selected at random from the general New Zealand population. While the DNA profile has yet to hit a match, Lamalu said the police investigation now has the best possible result to compare to those of potential suspects and hopefully solve a terrible tragedy. It's what we do, said Lamalu. We would love to be able to provide the information and help the police in their investigation. The same thought drives Latimer, as it did for the now retired Stu Alsop-Smith before her. The thing that struck me most is that Alicia was home that evening, asleep in her bed. Other people were in the house. Her sister Juliet was asleep in the bed next to her. Someone has entered that house and murdered and raped her, said Latimer. I can't even imagine actually what Alicia's parents went through. They're amazing people, and I'm hopeful we can provide some resolution. Anyone with information for the police can call 105 and quote either Operation Sturbridge or the case file number 800816/3613. These details will again be in the description box below, and I want to thank NZ Herald and Jared Savage because he has done amazing coverage. Let's continue. Now, if you have any info about the cases I cover on my channel, you can contact Crimestoppers on 0800 555 111 or go to 105 online or call 105. You can email me with case suggestions at nzmissing@gmail.com. Visit us on Facebook as well. This this video, of course, will not be monetized because of the stuff involved. So if you can help with donating a $3 coffee or something like that, that would be appreciated. All the information is in the description box below. Please hit the thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Hit the notification bell to all so you will get any updates. Let's continue. The New Zealand program Cold Case covered Alicia O'Reilly's case on the 23rd of November 2021. This is from the police website, police.govt.nz, and again in the description box below. I'm going to just run through this. It goes a brief overview and tells you how you can help. So again, Auckland's 6-year-old Alicia was found murdered in her bed on the morning of 16th of August 1980. Her sister Juliet had been sleeping just metres away in the same room of their canal home. Again, the crime shocked the country and hundreds of people were questioned, including those who worked or lived in the working class suburb. Forensic evidence was gathered from the scene built in 1980. There was no such thing as DNA testing and the samples were destroyed. Now, after 40 years, there has been a genuine breakthrough and real hope police will find Alicia's killer. Detectives have discovered a vaginal swab and slides that were made at the time of Alicia's post-mortem. From this evidence, a full DNA profile of Alicia's killer has been extracted. However, there is no match to anyone on the national database. The investigation has become a process of elimination. Police are collecting DNA samples from more than 1,200 males, a list comprised of those originally identified in the area canvass and others who have been added since. However, they know that the person may not even be on their list. A person who police thought was the suspect in the 1980s has been eliminated as the offender. Police are now asking for the public's help to come forward with any information that may help them identify Alicia's murderer. Did someone in your family react strangely when they heard the news of Alicia's killing? Do you know of anyone in the wider Avondale area who may have displayed red flag behaviour, peeping and peering, an unhealthy interest in children or burglary, who may not have come to police attention? Were you living in the Avondale area at the time of Alicia's death? Did you have a friend or family member visiting who may have been missed in the original area canvass? Did you work with someone or know someone in the Avondale area who suddenly disappeared following the killing? Police want any information which could help find them Alicia's killer, or for people to come forward who may be on the list to give a DNA sample so they can be positively eliminated. This case is truly solvable, but police need your help. So, there's a lot of thinking to do what you were doing, who you were seeing back in 1980, and I really hope that something happens that can solve this murder. Thank you very much to everyone who helps me. Thanks to those who support New Zealand Mysteries. If you like, subscribe, share, follow, chat or donate, you are supporting this community and it could not be done without you all. Thank you so much because I really do appreciate it. Thank you to the financial supporters who do keep me running. I appreciate it. If I have left your name off here, which is very, very likely, please email me at nzmissing.com. No, don't do that. Email me at nzmissing@gmail.com because then it'll probably get to me. I want to thank you for listening today. We were very lucky that we had a couple of really, really good articles by Jared Savage. So a big shout out to him. Be kind to someone else today, be kind to yourself and be safe, and I will see you on the next one. Thanks guys.